Hello there friends. Today I'll be taking you through a step-by-step process on how to draw a realistic portrait using colored pencils, and I'll be using this beautiful little girl I drew as my subject. Now I use a very systematic approach when it comes to drawing portraits with colored pencils. I start with the outline or sketch, and I have an entire video dedicated to drawing outlines, so you might want to check that out after watching this video. I believe getting an accurate outline or sketch will indeed set you up for success, as it is a very important step in the entire process. The next step is selection of colors. So I have color swatches of all my colored pencils, and this is something I do as soon as I get a new set of colored pencils. What that does is it helps me to choose colors appropriately, because all I have to do is compare the colors in the reference to my swatches and then select the appropriate colors. Bear in mind that all you need to do is select colors that are close enough to the reference. They don't have to be perfectly matched. I'll talk more about this during the tutorial. So let's start coloring, and I used the Prismacolor Premier pencils for this one. I always start with the eyes, the iris and pupil to be more specific. Pay close attention to the details in the eye because they'll be different for every portrait. Try to replicate the different shapes and details you see in the reference. In the context of realistic art, details are very important, so as much as possible, try to replicate what you see. However, you don't have to be 100% perfect. Trying to be absolutely perfect can sometimes take away from the fun. All you have to do is to be close enough to the reference. When it comes to human portraits, I like to blend using the burnishing technique, and this is where you layer your colored pencils from light to dark, and then apply a little more pressure as you get to the final layers to blend everything together. However, in the few areas like the eyeball, I sometimes blend using the solvent like you can see me do here. This is because I find it gives a very smooth look, and the eyeball is a very smooth and kind of shiny facial feature, and using the solvent helps me to achieve this look more accurately. One thing to also note is the white of the eye is never really white. This is because of the shadow cast on it by the eyelids most of the time. It usually has a grey hue to it. In a few instances, it may have a very light pink tone to it, and that was the case in this picture. So I colored the area with a light shade of pink and then blended it out again with a solvent, this time using a Q-tip. As you go along, you may want to adjust a few things or add a few details here and there, depending on what you see in the reference. Let's move on to the skin, starting with the upper and lower eyelids. Like I said, I use the burnishing technique for blending, and this is where I layer colors from light to dark and then apply more pressure as I get to my final layers to blend everything together. That means we need to layer before we blend. So I look out for the lighter skin tone in the areas I'm coloring and apply that as my base layer. In this drawing, it was a light shade of beige. After, I layer the darker colors on top. I used a lot of browns in this one. Again, study the reference, and the skin usually has different tones and values, and the more layering you do, the more realistic the drawing generally turns out. So I've gotten to my final layers now, and I do my burnishing at this stage. In this image, I blended using the peach colored pencil in most areas, but also the beige in a few other areas. If you're not sure about your blending because you think you may have to do a few changes, you can blend with moderate pressure, reassess the drawing, and make changes if you want to before going in with full force to blend out everything. Once everything is fully blended out, there is very little tooth of the paper left, and it becomes difficult to do more layering. You still may be able to pull out a few highlights here and there depending on the paper you are using. We will talk about paper choice later on in the video. So remember, there is still skin underneath the eyebrows, so rather than just drawing strokes of hair on white paper to represent them, you may want to draw in the skin underneath the brows before actually drawing in the brows. This would obviously depend on the reference, but I find that for most images, you still get to see a glimpse of skin through the brows, so try and replicate that using the same technique for skin we just spoke about. So I did a few markings with a grey colored pencil in regards to where I'll be drawing in the brows, so I don't lose track of where they are supposed to be before drawing in the skin. Also, because the brow itself casts a shadow over the skin, I layered a few grey colored pencils to mimic this effect. The color of the brows will depend on the reference you are working with. In this case, they had a dark grey appearance with some blue hues in some regions. So pay attention to the reference with regards to the direction and volume of the brows. They usually move in the same direction but are not completely uniform. So try and replicate the little inconsistencies that you may see. If you are enjoying this so far, don't forget to give me a like. Also subscribe for more tips and tutorials. I've also got a free ebook you may want to check out. It's titled The Basics of Realistic Colored Pencil Art. Very helpful, especially if you are just starting out with realistic colored pencil drawing. I'll leave a link in the description. So we basically use the same techniques for the other eye. If you want to learn more about drawing eyes, I've got a video where I discussed only the eyes of this particular portrait, so you may want to check that out after this video. Let's move on to the forehead and temple region. The forehead for most portraits tends to be a little flat, not flat in appearance but with respect to color. There usually aren't many colors in that region of the face, and if the subject is looking directly at the light source, there's usually a highlight in the center of the forehead. Throughout your drawing, you need to be paying attention to the highlights, shadows and midtones, because this is what creates that 3D or realistic effect. Again, I've got an entire video explaining this concept, so you may want to see that as well. Also, pay close attention to the direction of your pencil strokes. The contours of the face will help guide you with your strokes. In this image, the ear, hair and parts of the neck appeared to be out of focus. That is to say, they had a blurry appearance. And this is one of a few instances where I use solvents rather than the burnishing technique to blend. This is because blending with a solvent creates a smooth effect, and therefore that blurry effect is much more achievable. Also, areas of this nature tend to lack details, so when you are drawing regions that are blurry, you need to be a little light-handed with the details. I'm doing the hair now. Like I said, it was mostly out of focus in this image. The main colors here are different shades of grey, black, a few browns and indigo blue. The technique here is not very different from what we do with the skin. However, with hair, I usually pick out the darkest regions and mark them out first. This helps give a general view of what it will look like once I'm done shading. After, I go in with the other colors. I do the base layer and then layer other colors on top. I then blend with a solvent and go over again with the colored pencils to create more depth. Because we are blending with a solvent, it is much easier to layer lighter colors on top, and that is how I was able to achieve those light grey flyaway hairs on the side of the head, which you will see at the end. Again, because the hair here is out of focus, I was careful not to do too many details as to ruin the blurry effect. The paper choice for realistic portraiture is very important. I used the vellum surface paper from the Strathmore Bristol 300 series for this. Because the surface is moderately rough, it allowed me to do a lot of layers without issues. If I were to use a smooth surface paper, I would not be able to layer as much. Now, the smooth surface paper from Strathmore can also be used for portraits, but only when you suspect that it will not require too many layers. Also, value and contrast are more important for realism than just color. Value refers to how light or dark a color is. Sometimes when selecting colored pencils for your art, you may not get the exact color you are searching for, but that should not discourage you. Usually, you'll find a color that is close enough to the reference, and that is enough. What you need to remember is that creating adequate contrast between the lights and darks of the drawing is what ultimately creates realism. Whenever I draw the nose, I like to start with the nostrils, which are usually the darkest part of the nose. They are usually a dark shade of brown, or in some instances black. The bridge of the nose is usually an area of highlight because the light source tends to fall on that region of the face majority of the time. In this image, the base color, which was a patty beige along with a very light shade of brown, was enough to create this effect. So what I did was I laid down the base layer, went over it with a light shade of brown, and then blended with the base layer. Since there is a strong highlight in that region, it does not require a lot of layers. Also, when shading the skin, move in elliptical or circular motions. This way, you would avoid any start or stop areas and therefore create a smooth and a more natural look. Lips are one of my favorite things to draw. Again, the procedure here is not too different from the rest of the skin, except in cases where the subject is wearing perhaps a strong color of lipstick or something of the sort, and even then the process remains fairly the same. One thing to take note of is the creases in the lips. You may want to lightly mark them out before shading. Again, apply your layers from light to dark and burnish as you get to the final layers. However, be careful not to ruin the creases in the lips. The corners of the mouth also tend to be darker relative to the other parts. The teeth are never pure white. The lips usually cast a shadow on them and therefore they usually have a shade of grey. They may even appear brown in certain instances and that can be discouraging to draw. However, no matter how dark they appear, try to replicate what you see in the reference and you will notice that in the end, it all comes together to look a lot more natural than you may have imagined. So here I'm filling in the cheeks, same techniques, using the circular or elliptical motion like I did for the majority of the face, and then burnishing as usual. Like I said earlier, the neck is also slightly out of focus, so I blended using a solvent. I then did her dress and ended with her nice shiny necklace. Don't forget to like if you've enjoyed this. Also, if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section. Subscribe for more tutorials and I'll see you in the next one.